Hi, I'm Joel from Coaches Rising, and this dialogue was recorded as part of the Power of Embodied Transformation 2016. For more information, you can visit www.powerofembodiedtransformation.com. In this dialogue, I'm talking with Mandy Blake. She's a master somatic coach and creator of the Body Equals Brain program, and she really knows her stuff. She artfully combines the latest discoveries in neuroscience with somatics to create a potent coaching formula. Enjoy. Oh, great to be with you today, Mandy. How's things going?
Well, Joel, it's great to be with you too, and collaborating again on the poet course. I'm really excited for what we have planned this year.
Yeah, me too. I think it's maybe 3 or 4 times now we've had these conversations, and I remember the one we did for the neuroscience of change, and that was one of the most beautiful explorations of embodiment and neuroscience and coaching that I ever was lucky to be part of. So don't want to set expectations too high for today. But I think, so yeah, you're one of the faculty members on the Power of Embodied Transformation, and I wanted to ask you, what was it that brought you into working in this kind of way? Was there a sort of an experience or something that happened that had you begin working in this kind of way, coaching others?
There was an experience. There was both a professional and a personal side to the experience. So I had been coaching for a number of years already, and before I came upon the not really the concept of coaching with and through the body. I had encountered that before, but it didn't totally make sense to me. But what I found was I had certain clients that that I would get really stuck with, or they would get really stuck. And I couldn't help them get unstuck. With all the arsenal of tools I had, and I had a ton of training at that point from 3 or 4 different coaching schools, and I still would have these clients that would get stuck. And there's one woman in particular that I tend to talk about because she stands out in my mind as the one person that it was sort of emblematic of this problem that I had with several clients. And she was a consultant, and she really wanted to spend more time with her young son, and she was just driven to do things for her clients. And while she felt I was very helpful, that's what she reported to me, I kept watching her over and over turn to help her clients rather than spending time with her son, which was what she was coming to me for. And as her coach, I felt really, really frustrated. And then sort of around that same time in my own life, I had a really major relationship breakdown, and I was very heartbroken, could not seem to get over it, even though I had studied positive psychology. I knew all these wonderful coaching tools and tricks. I was actually in therapy at the time. And still, I was really stuck in an emotional stranglehold. And it was around that time that a friend mentioned to me this idea of coaching and working with and through the body. And she and I had recently been through a program together, a personal growth program together that incorporated the body somewhat. And I was starting to catch on, there may be something to this embodiment, sort of behavioral learning embodiment link. And from there, I went on to study in a number of different modalities. The first of those was studying at the Strozzi Institute with Richard Strozzi, who's on the faculty, and Doug Silsby was also studying there at the same time I was. And that really opened my mind and my world to a whole different way of working with people and helping them get unstuck. So as I deepened my embodiment, I was able to get sort of release this emotional stranglehold that I was in. And although I had completed working with this one client, I started to see that with other clients where they were stuck, I was able to, I just had more tools, more arrows in my quiver, more approaches. And I started to find those approaches really, really valuable for making a genuine, lasting change in myself and in my clients.
The curiosity comes up of what happened? What happened? What did it make possible? And like if you could remember like what that was like, and it's not necessarily being in that emotional turmoil, and I've been in breakups myself, but it seems like something began to shift when you began to include the body and work through the body. What was that? What happened?
I think the biggest thing for me is there was a big difference between having ideas. So, for example, I had studied with Martin Seligman, who was the past president of the American Psychological Association, and he's kind of known as the founder of positive psychology. And I had studied with him and gotten just a raft of tools and worksheets and ideas about how to approach a stuck emotional situation. And I just, for myself, was all over those worksheets, and filling stuff out and really changing my thinking around the situation. But what didn't change was the sense of heartbreak, which was like a physical sensation. I'd drive by the areas where this person and I had spent time together, and I would feel something physical. Now, at the time that was happening, I didn't know to connect that up to these ideas and these worksheets. But what started to happen as I started to work through the body is that the physiological reactions to the things that were hard for me. So not just this heartbreak, but things like being decisive or saying no, or behavioral qualities that I had sort of adopted through my life that didn't necessarily help me or serve me in what I was trying to do or create, or relationships I was in, that those things that provoked some sort of discomfort or anxiety or discomfort is a good word for it, right? You might have your heart beating fast or your stomach in knots, or the more I was able to be with those sensations and experience them and not have them drive my behavior. Gosh, my heart's beating and therefore I'm going to turn away, right? And that's not something we do consciously. But those were the kinds of reactions that I would have. And so what started to happen is I was able to be more present to my sensation in a way that informed me and could help me make better choices in my life. But I wasn't driven by that discomfort to do something that wasn't helpful to me or wasn't useful to me. And as I learned how to do that for myself, and I think you really, really do need to learn how to do that for yourself first. As I learned how to do that for myself, I was then able to start to share that more and more with my clients. So where they were stuck in places like, I don't feel confident about this particular presentation I need to give, or I need to negotiate something with a business partner, and I'm really scared because I perceive this person as having a lot of power, right? In those situations where I could help clients direct them to their physical experience, which is real-time experience rather than an idea, they were able to intervene in a place that is like, this is where the lived experience, the moment-to-moment experience is happening. Excuse me. So I think about it as it's a difference between idea and experience. It's a very experiential way of learning. Mm.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I think that's one of the powerful things about working in this way, is that we're moving from just this kind of thinking about things and having ideas about things and awareness, but being able to be present and be present to that sense of discomfort that often arises as we are facing certain situations in our lives, maybe leadership positions or whatever it is we're doing, and then we're able to stay with those sensations, and then something new begins to open up as we do that. We create, I like this word metabolize, like it's something I've been using recently. We kind of begin to metabolize that discomfort and we can also start to create new ways of being in this way. I know that like something you bring to this kind of work, this embodied work, is you're very you've got a lot of knowledge about the neuroscience and the neurobiology behind this. Perhaps you could just give us a perspective on that, of what's happening in our bodies as we as we've grown and as we face these situations and as we overcome them. It's a very broad question, but something comes up for you when I ask that.
Yeah, a lot of different things come up for me. I think, one of the things that is fascinating to me about the explosion of research in neuroscience, when I was growing up and I studied human biology in college, and one of the things that I learned was that the human brain doesn't change much in adulthood. And in the last 10 to 15 years, but it's sort of starting about 20 years ago or so, really neuroscientists have completely put the lie to that. Like it's not true at all. Our brains change massively throughout adulthood. It's just that the rate of growth, and I don't mean growth like physical enlargement, but the rate of development, of change, really slows in adulthood as compared to when we're quite young. So when we're young, our brain learns how to put a lot of things on autopilot, including certain kinds of behavioral responses to the world around us. And those things get wired in until they feel hardwired. They feel so hardwired that we actually sometimes don't even perceive alternative behavioral options. Right. So I mentioned that for me, saying no was a hard thing. And as women, culturally, we tend to, in the Western world and around the world, we tend to be socialized to be nice, to say yes, to be people pleasing, all of that. So you'll learn this from your family. You'll learn this from the culture that you're in. You'll learn this from the institutions you participate in, schools or religious institutions. Right. And all of this kind of behavioral learning does get hardwired in to the point where saying no, if that's something that's hard for you, might produce enough physical discomfort that you won't do it because it makes you feel uncomfortable. You're like, I can't say no in this particular, I can't say no to my boss, right? Or I can't say no to my spouse about this particular thing, or I can't say no to my parent, or whatever, right? Whomever. So it gets hardwired in, and we have to remember, of course, our brains don't actually stop here. Like there's all this fascination with this organ, but this organ is part of a system it goes out to our very fingers and toes, right? So really this is the title of my forthcoming book, Your Body is Your Brain, right? Really our thinking, and particularly our behavioral, our social and emotional thinking, as it were, happens all the way out here. And it happens here where our hearts beat fast, or our stomach's tied in knots, or whatever it may be. And so when we want to create change in adulthood, which as coaches it's part of why people hire us, right? Help me change something in my life. And we generally take an approach, not just what are you doing in the world, right? But what's the way of being that's giving rise to that doing in the world? And when we start to look at people's way of being, we're looking at their behavior, their automatic default behavior, the behaviors that are easy for them and hard for them. It's either easy or hard to say no. It's either easy or hard to be decisive. It's either very accessible or not accessible at all to stand up and have courage or confidence in a particular situation, whether it's a high-stakes presentation or a situation of conflict, right? So those behaviors get wired into us, and they get wired into us in the whole of our body. And then if we want to create change in those behaviors, it makes sense to not just look at the ideas, right? Not just use the worksheets. Those are incredibly helpful. But they're just like 1/10 or at best 1/2 of the solution, right? I'd lean closer to 1/10 given what I know now. Um, and so for that reason, involving the body, involving movement, involving practice, all of those things we now know actually have impact on changing the brain in adulthood. So I often talk about these elements of neuroplasticity, these elements of how the brain changes, and we can talk about those if you like. But I think that the key point is the brain changes, and it can change radically in adulthood. But it takes more than just those worksheets, more than just good ideas, more than just words and language and new ways of thinking.
I think I love. I mean, what touches me about this, and what changed in my own coaching, working in this way, is that we can't just be talking about things. It's not. Creating self-awareness through talking can have a certain impact, but when the rubber meets the road, we need to be working with the language of our bodies. It's this very immediate, present moment kind of experience, and we need to be taking on new practices. We need to be, rewiring our nervous systems and our bodies, and that's what this program is about. And yeah, I am curious. Like, what are some of the key elements of that you know of? That like, yes, if you're wanting to create change, you've got to be doing a number of these things. And I know you're going to be speaking more about that in the program itself, but maybe you could share a few of those with us now.
Yeah, in the program, I'm going to talk about the 6 elements of neuroplasticity and kind of what we know about how the brain changes, both in childhood, but also in adulthood. Like, how do you leverage that as a coach? And I'll talk about 2, maybe 3, if we'll see how our time goes right here. So one of the most important is you could call it many things. I tend to call it disruption. And really what that is interrupting old, automatic, habitual, default ways of behaving. So one of the traps that I fell into early on in coaching, and one of the traps I see other coaches sometimes fall into, is getting a really good idea about how your client could be, and really holding the vision for them of how they could be, and helping them adopt all kinds of new actions or new behaviors or new ways of being in the world. But then when they're under pressure, they go back to how they were before. And the client's disappointed, and more often than not, the client will come in and say, I really screwed up. It's all my fault. And they're really hard on themselves. And all of that is totally unnecessary, because really what happens is, I'm not kidding when I say these kinds of default behavioral ways of being in the world get hardwired into us. They really do physically get hardwired in, and the cells in the nervous system change to make saying no, if that's what we're talking about, hard, right? Or to make being decisive or having courage in the presentations you're giving or entering into conflict, to make those things physically hard for you to do. And there's a really good reason your body learned that response, always. It's wise, intelligent, biologically adaptive, self-protective. It's good. The problem is that now it's limiting you. So what disruption is finding a way to interrupt that literal physical hardwiring of your default behavior. And what that means is 2 things. It means knowing and having experiential familiarity with what happens when you get tripped up. And what I mean by experiential familiarity is you can articulate at a pretty fine level of detail, here's what happens. I tilt my head like this, and my shoulders go up, and my heart starts to beat fast, and my hands start to sweat. Like, you know what happens to you physically when you're trying to say no or give the presentation or enter into conflict or whatever it might be. So you get familiar with what the default is, and then you find ways to interrupt that. So one of the ways that you might interrupt or disrupt that is by, if you tilt your head and put your shoulders up, tilt your head this way and put your shoulders down, right? And then the second element of neuroplasticity I want to talk about is practice. So it'd be great to say, well, when you go into your presentation and your heart's hammering and your hands are sweating, and it might be a little hard to do things about that, but you can sure go like this. You don't want the presentation to be the first time you do this, because your body's not practiced at that. It'd be like going, okay, here are the chords on the guitar. Now I'm going to go perform. Right? Now I know where to put my feet. You can't do that. You have to practice the chords over and over and over, and strum and chord at the same time, or piano, or dive off the high dive, or kick the soccer ball. The way your body learns is through practice. It's the only way your body learns, and any athlete or musician or actor can tell you this. That's how the body learns. And so there's when you can incorporate a physical practice that interrupts old behavioral habits, that is a very fast route to lasting change, and it's very experiential. And you can combine that with the worksheets that might help you come up with a new idea or a new way of seeing. And when you have all those things together, you're really accessing the whole self, the whole person, in a way that supports real physical change that underlies behavioral change, neural change that underlies behavioral change. And that's why embodied transformation is so lasting and so effective. I'm
just thinking of, I love the answer, and I'm just thinking of an experience I had quite a few years ago now, and it was not a coaching experience, but I was like with a group of men, and we all had a common interest around personal development and connection, and he gave me some really direct feedback, and it was it's vulnerable to share it, but it was he said, like, sometimes, Joel, I find you kind of flaccid. It's kind of like you withdraw, or you pull yourself back, and you're not really here. And I was like, first of all, getting that feedback was confronting, but suddenly something started to come into view. So, but I remember, so there was this sense of like getting the feedback, but then my response immediately was like, oh yeah, I do that, don't I? And I started to be in the same way, be in that kind of behavior that he was pointing out. And he was kind of like, I noticed it seems like you're doing it now. And it was like suddenly catching it in the moment was profound. It was profound. I caught the kind of emotional tone of it. I caught the way my body was kind of moving back and forward. I caught the tone of my voice, and the space I was creating between him and him and me. And in that moment, I got an imprint of it, and it began to, it didn't change immediately, but over the months and years following that, it did transform, and it was getting a sense of that shift that really struck me, and I wanted to just share that for you.
Well, that's exactly the thing, Joel. That is, it's the experiential learning, and as opposed to the intellectual learning, which is a great companion to the experiential learning. But since what we're helping people with as coaches, our job is to help people shift their experience in life.
Yeah.
And if we attack that only through intellectual learning, we're just using like such a small subset of arrows in the quiver. So it is that experiential learning that you get this aha, right? And then you can, if you have the right kinds of tools of embodiment and know how to work with that, then you can leverage that experience into something that helps you shift in ways that are more how you want to be in the world.
So you've mentioned a couple of these, like these ingredients to, the kind of what we need in order to create change. I'm just curious, and you said one of them was practice. What are some of the practices you've given people? I don't know if you could share those with us, but what are some of these practices you've shared, and how did you kind of come to them as a practice?
Yeah. So, gosh, I recently, for my Body Equals Brain course, started mapping out what are all the practices that I've ever used, and started putting them into categories. And so that's flashing in my mind like it's many pages long. And I think one of the things that I will say is when you start to develop a certain level of mastery with how to work through the body, and that takes time, it takes working in your own body, you start to be able to develop and invent practices. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the Power of Embodied Transformation is what are the clues that you can look for that can help you figure out how to design an effective practice, an effective embodied practice for your clients. So I'm going to try and shortcut some of that by giving some tips about how you can invent practices. But what's coming to mind, a story is coming to mind as you ask that question, and it's about a client that I was working with this fall. And this client actually came to me because she wanted to figure out how to set boundaries at work so that she could take better care of her health. She was doing a lot of working late and that kind of thing. And immediately after she came to me, her mother, whom she's had a very difficult relationship with over her life, and she's an only child, her mother was struck ill with a very serious illness. And so she was, rather than setting boundaries at work, needing to set boundaries in a very close, intense, personal relationship that's a complicated one. And one of the things that we did, I was working with her entirely on the phone. One of the things that we did was we worked on physically setting boundaries. And I'd love to, I'll explain what I did, but I wonder if I can also get up and show you, which was what I explained to her to do in her, I was explaining this over the phone, is put your hands on the back of a rolling chair and push that away. So I had her physically push something away and literally with a physical motion create a boundary for herself. And then we added some words that were very specific to her situation with her mother. And for example, one of the things that she added was, I'll be leaving at 8 o'clock this evening, right? So her mother was a very, very demanding person. They had this very complicated relationship, and one of the things that was really challenging for her is, right as she was about to leave, there would be a whole onslaught of new things that her mother needed help with. It wasn't that she didn't want to take care of her mother in her illness. She really cared. But she also needed to be able to negotiate some room for herself in this very demanding relationship. And so that's something that in the moment emerged out of what we were talking about. And what happened was she would, her mother lived in a different city. She would go to her hotel room. She would push the rolling chair in her hotel room. She would say, I'm leaving at 8 o'clock. We worked really hard on how to do that simply and clearly, as opposed to, well, I'm going to leave at 8, and I think I really need to go because I have this, and I need to blah, 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 all these words, right? And we moved it just to I'm leaving at 8 o'clock tonight, Mother. If there's anything more, we'll deal with it tomorrow, right? Boom, there's a boundary. And in doing that, she was able to start to have really different conversations with her mother. It did not make her mother any less demanding. And particularly in this very needy time of her life, it didn't make her, she was more demanding than usual, right? But this client was able to start to have different conversations with her mother that let her get out of there at 8 o'clock and spend, an hour with her husband in the evening, or spend an hour winding down at night, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but what happens when I'm designing practices is I'm really listening to the client, what's happening for them, and looking for the physicality of how to both disrupt their default behavior and build a new skill.
Yeah, nice. That's a beautiful answer. And perhaps you could share just a little bit with us about what, I know you've been speaking about what you're going to do in the Power of Embodied Transformation. You're going to be leading 2 sessions. You could just share briefly, what you'll cover in each one and what people are going to get from it.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about in one of the sessions, I'm going to talk about those 6 elements of neuroplasticity, what they are, why they work, what's the neuroscience behind them, and more importantly, because all of that's interesting and useful to understand. I think when you understand that, it helps you do some of this stuff that's maybe a little more far out for your clients because you're more grounded in it. Right? But so it's helpful to understand, like, here's the science behind it. But really the art of it is, I think, what we're most interested in. And how do you take those elements of neuroplasticity and combine them in such a way that you can create useful, high leverage sorts of interventions for your clients. So we'll focus there in one of the sessions. And then in the other session, we're going to talk about, I mentioned before, tips and tricks. That's maybe a little lightweight way to put it, but really, like, what are the clues that you look for when you're going to design a practice like the one that I just described with the client who created boundaries by physically having something that she could push away from her body, right? There's nothing magical about a chair. You could also do this with a person or a partner if you set it all up in the right way, right? You could probably do it pushing against the wall, right? So how do you look for the clues or listen for clues in what your client is saying, in what they're experiencing in their body that would lead you to, here's how I would design a practice for that. Here's something you might try physically that would support your new idea or your new way of being or your new behavior that you're trying to institute in your life. So those are the 2 main themes, I would say, and we'll get to talk about a lot of client stories. And here, I like for my calls in this course and in other things I teach to be really interactive. So I really like to hear from people and get questions and stories from them as well, and kind of pick apart, well, what would we do in this situation or that situation?
Nice, yeah, great. That's one of the things I love about putting together these programs is we get to learn from people like you. And as a coach, I'm always wanting to know about how can I serve my clients and really help them make these kind of shifts. So I notice I get really excited hearing about that, and I think it's probably a good place to bring this to a close. I think people have gotten a good sense about how this, what kind of things become possible when we work in this way, and some of the the key ingredients of of change, and of designing new practices. So thank you, Mandy.
Great, you're welcome. It's such a pleasure, Joel. I always really enjoy your questions, which are so just draw out what I'm excited about. So thank you. I always love our conversations.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm just genuinely excited, so it's I think that helps a lot. So great. Hi, Joel here again, and I hope you were inspired by the conversation. If that's so, I'd love it if you share it by clicking on the share button on this page. because I care deeply about this approach and I want as many people to know about it and be served by it as possible. If you're curious about going deeper into all the topics we've been talking about, then I encourage you to take a look at our coach training. During the training, it's online with Mandy and Richard Strozzi Heckler, Doug Silsby and Pete Hamill, all stellar teachers. They're going to show you how to facilitate this kind of work, this kind of embodied transformation with your clients. You're going to grow your capacity to see your clients' conditioned, habituated patterns as they arise. And then you'll help them disrupt these patterns and shift into new, more empowered and creative ways of being. Learning this stuff was the missing key for me in my own coaching and gave me this confidence that I could really help my clients. So if you like the sound of this, you'll find more details at www.powerofembodiedtransformation.com.